The morning of May 21st, 1943, Convoy on 184, Mid-Atlantic. Kapitän-Leutnant Heinz Kersant surfaced U-231 in what should have been safety, 600 miles from the nearest Allied airfield, deep within the zone German submariners called the Black Pit. For 3 years, this expanse of ocean had belonged to the wolf packs. No aircraft could reach it, no escorts could protect the convoys here. It was a killing ground. But at 2100 hours, Kersant's bridge lookout spotted something impossible. Aircraft. Not one patrol plane on the edge of its range, desperately racing back to base. Multiple aircraft. Circling, hunting, and behind them, on the horizon, a ship no one had warned them about. A tiny aircraft carrier, barely larger than a merchant vessel, steaming alongside the very convoy they'd been stalking. Lieutenant Commander William Drain pushed his TBF Avenger into a shallow dive. He'd spotted the surfaced submarine 60 miles ahead of the convoy, exactly where German doctrine placed the scouts. U-231's diesels were charging batteries after a night of shadowing, her crew confident in the arithmetic that had ruled the Atlantic since 1939. Aircraft couldn't be here, yet here they were. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The depth charges fell across U-231's diving wake. The submarine's bridge was wrecked. Chlorine gas from damaged batteries forced her back to the surface hours later. Kersant transmitted his final report to Admiral Karl Dönitz's headquarters in France before scuttling, attacked by carrier aircraft in mid-Atlantic. Forced to surface, bridge destroyed. Am scuttling boat. Dönitz read the message with growing unease. Carrier aircraft. In the Black Pit. The message made no sense according to everything German naval intelligence believed about Allied capabilities. Fleet carriers were too valuable, too vulnerable to risk in anti-submarine operations. The British had learned that lesson when HMS Courageous went down in 1939. Yet here was an experienced commander reporting carrier aircraft in the one zone that should have been beyond their reach. What Dönitz didn't know, what none of the German naval staff comprehended, was that the vessel hunting U-231 wasn't a fleet carrier at all. USS Bogue displaced 7,800 tons, carried just 21 aircraft, and had been built from a merchant ship hull in less than a year. She was slow. Her wooden flight deck and thin steel hull made her vulnerable. By traditional naval standards, she was barely a warship. But by May 1943, the United States Navy was commissioning one new escort carrier every 6 days. And these improvised ships were about to do what Germany's admirals had declared impossible. They would appear everywhere. In every convoy, transforming the Atlantic from a German hunting ground into an Allied lake so thoroughly that U-boat crews would refuse to believe their own eyes. The shock German submariners experienced wasn't tactical, it was existential. They'd entered the war as the Grey Wolves, elite predators who would starve Britain into submission. They'd come to expect losses, to accept danger, but what they couldn't process, what shattered morale more completely than any depth charge, was the systematic impossibility of what they were witnessing. Tiny carriers appearing in convoys, aircraft operating hundreds of miles from land, technology that detected submarines day or night, in any weather. And worst of all, the growing certainty that the ocean itself had become transparent. March 5, 1943. USS Bogue departed Norfolk, Virginia, as the nucleus of America's first dedicated hunter-killer group. Captain Giles Short, a 1918 Naval Academy graduate, commanded the converted merchant ship and her screen of 4 elderly destroyers. The mission seemed straightforward: provide air cover for convoy HX-288 crossing to Liverpool. But this patrol would establish a pattern that would revolutionize naval warfare and shock the German submarine force into psychological collapse. The concept of escort carriers had emerged from desperate necessity. By spring 1942, German U-boats were sinking ships faster than Allied yards could build them. In March 1943 alone, wolf packs destroyed over 80 merchant vessels, totaling nearly 500,000 tons. The arithmetic favoured Germany, Churchill would later write that the U-boat peril was the only thing that truly frightened him during the entire war. The mid-Atlantic gap represented the critical vulnerability. Land-based aircraft from Britain, Iceland, and Newfoundland could patrol the convoy routes near shore, but a 600 to 800-mile stretch of ocean in the center remained beyond their range. U-boats concentrated there, surfacing to chase convoys at 17 knots on diesel engines, submerging only when aircraft forced them down. Without air cover in the gap, even heavily escorted convoys faced slaughter. Fleet carriers offered one solution, but their cost and vulnerability made deployment with slow merchant convoys impossible. A fleet carrier required 3 years to build and cost the equivalent of 10 destroyers. The loss of HMS Courageous to U-29 in September 1939, within weeks of the war's start, demonstrated that fleet carriers couldn't survive anti-submarine operations. Britain needed hundreds of carriers. She had fewer than 10. President Roosevelt, 18 months before Pearl Harbor, recognized what traditional naval thinkers on both sides dismissed as impossible: convert merchant ships into carriers, build them on commercial production lines, accept that they would be slow, vulnerable, and limited, but produce them in such quantities that their weaknesses became irrelevant. German naval intelligence reviewed the initial Escort carrier specifications with professional incredulity: maximum speed of 18 knots, barely faster than a surfaced submarine, wooden flight decks on some models, commercial-grade steel instead of armor plating, single screws vulnerable to torpedo damage. Captain Friedrich Ruge, serving as naval liaison to the German High Command, wrote in his analysis for Grand Admiral Erich Raeder, "The Americans appear to be confusing quantity with quality. These vessels are maritime disasters waiting to happen. Any trained U-boat commander will feast upon them." The German assessment rested on solid foundations. Their U-boat force had sunk 1,299 Allied ships, totaling 6,266,000 tons between September 1939 and December 1942. Wolfpack tactics developed by Dönitz had turned the North Atlantic into a killing ground. U-boats operated with near impunity, surfacing at night to hunt convoys, diving only when aircraft forced them below. But German intelligence made 3 critical errors in evaluating escort carriers. First, the carriers didn't need to be fast because they traveled with convoys moving at 8 to 10 knots. Second, they didn't need large air groups because their aircraft only needed to force U-boats to submerge, reducing submarine speed from 17 knots to 7 knots underwater, making attack positioning impossible. Third, and most critically, the Americans would build so many carriers that the entire Atlantic would fall within aircraft coverage. By spring 1943, the production statistics that would doom the U-boat force were already accumulating. Henry Kaiser's Vancouver-Washington shipyard had reduced construction time for a Casablanca-class escort carrier from 6 months to 10 weeks. Using assembly line techniques learned from automobile manufacturing, Kaiser's workers could launch a new escort carrier every 5 days by summer 1943. The carriers themselves were modest vessels. USS Bogue measured 495 feet in length and displaced 9,800 tons. Her flight deck could handle aircraft landing at 80 miles per hour. The hangar accommodated 28 aircraft with basic maintenance facilities. She carried 12 F-4F Wildcat fighters and 9 TBF Avenger torpedo bombers. Her armament consisted of 2 5-inch guns and numerous light anti-aircraft weapons, sufficient for self-defense but nothing approaching fleet carrier capability. Yet these limitations masked revolutionary capabilities that German intelligence completely failed to grasp. Each escort carrier operated with technologies that would transform anti-submarine warfare. ASV Mark III radar could detect a surfaced submarine at 15 miles in total darkness. High-frequency direction-finding equipment, called HFDUF, could triangulate U-boat radio transmissions with devastating accuracy, and carried in Avenger bomb bays, disguised as Mark 24 mines to conceal their nature, were FIDO acoustic homing torpedoes that could pursue submarines through evasive maneuvers. The operational concept was equally revolutionary. Traditional convoy escorts could only react to attacks, forced to choose between pursuing submarines and protecting merchant ships. Escort carriers had no such constraints when operating as hunter-killer groups. Their sole mission was to find and destroy U-boats wherever they operated. But even when traveling directly with convoys, the carriers provided continuous air cover that made U-boat attack positioning impossible. USS Bogue's first convoy escort mission in March 1943 revealed the tactical transformation immediately. Her aircraft maintained patrols ahead and around the convoy throughout daylight hours. U-boats that surfaced to scout or position for attack found aircraft overhead within minutes. Forced to crash dive repeatedly, they exhausted batteries and fell behind the convoy. No longer could wolf packs coordinate attacks from surface positions. The ocean was no longer opaque. Captain Lieutenant Peter Kramer, commanding U-333, experienced this new reality on April 23, 1943. His boat surfaced 650 miles southwest of Ireland, well within the Black Pit where aircraft had never operated. Kramer needed to charge batteries after a night's evasion. The morning was clear. His lookouts scanned empty horizons. No land-based aircraft could reach this position. The mathematics were absolute. Then came the shout from the bridge. Aircraft approaching from the northeast. Not possible. Kramer checked charts again. The nearest Allied airfield was 800 miles distant. No patrol bomber could reach here and return. Yet 2 Avenger torpedo bombers closed rapidly, vectored to his position by radar contact. The crash dive alarm sent the crew scrambling. 35 seconds from alarm to periscope depth if everything worked perfectly. But the Americans had timed their approach precisely, arriving just as U-333's conning tower slipped beneath the surface. Depth charges bracketed the diving submarine. The explosions caused minor damage. More critically, they forced the boat to remain deep for hours, consuming battery power and oxygen. When Kramer finally surfaced after dark, his war diary entry captured the confusion. Aircraft at impossible range from land, must be from fleet carrier, but no fleet carrier reported in area. Surfaced after 2 hours to find convoy with converted merchant vessel launching aircraft. How many of these ships do they have? The answer to Kramer's question would have shattered German morale. By May 1943, the United States Navy had commissioned 11 escort carriers with 40 more under construction. Each carrier operated between 24 and 30 aircraft. The pilots were mostly reservists, men who had been civilians 2 years earlier, trained in abbreviated programs. Yet these amateur pilots flying from merchant ship carriers were accomplishing what German admirals had declared impossible: the complete suppression of the U-boat threat through continuous presence. The transformation unfolded with shocking speed. In March 1943, U-boats sank 50 Allied ships. By May, with escort carriers operational, losses dropped to 34 ships, while U-boat losses surged to 41 submarines destroyed. More U-boats sunk than merchant ships lost. The arithmetic of the tonnage war had reversed in 60 days. Rear Admiral Karl Dönitz, commanding the U-boat force from headquarters in occupied France, reviewed intelligence reports with growing alarm. His staff counted at least 20 escort carriers operational by June 1943. If accurate, this represented more than a tactical challenge. It meant the fundamental transformation of Atlantic warfare. Every convoy could carry its own air cover. The Black Pit no longer existed. Everywhere was now within aircraft range. What German intelligence couldn't comprehend was the industrial capacity enabling this transformation. Henry Kaiser's shipyards operated as assembly lines. Components manufactured in 267 factories across 32 states arrived on precise schedules. Workers installed prefabricated sections weighing 200 tons, complete with wiring and equipment. Assembly proceeded 24 hours per day, 7 days per week. The 50th escort carrier, USS Casablanca, was commissioned in November 1943, just 18 months after laying the first keel. The ship was built in 101 days from keel to commissioning. Korvettenkapitän Adalbert Schnee, one of Germany's most decorated U-boat commanders, encountered this reality on July 13, 1943, when U-201 was caught on the surface by aircraft from USS Escort. His post-action report revealed profound shock. Aircraft appeared without warning. No time for proper crash dive. Went deep immediately. Heard multiple depth charges. Remained at maximum depth for 6 hours. Surfaced after dark. Immediately illuminated by aircraft with powerful light. This pattern repeated 3 times. Aircraft seemed to know exactly where we would surface. What Schnee didn't know was that Corps' aircraft carried radar capable of detecting a periscope-sized object at 5 miles in darkness. Combined with searchlights for illumination and acoustic homing torpedoes, darkness no longer protected U-boats. Every surface moment invited death from above. German crews had always counted on night operations to recharge batteries and reposition for attacks. Now, every nighttime surfacing meant facing radar-equipped aircraft that could see through darkness as easily as day. The psychological impact on U-boat crews was immediate and devastating. Radio intercepts revealed growing anxiety among submarine commanders about American wonder weapons that found targets regardless of evasion tactics. Morale reports spoke of crews becoming reluctant to surface, even for essential battery charging. The submarines that had terrorized the Atlantic for 3 years were now cowering beneath the waves, their batteries depleting, their air foul, their mission impossible. May 22, 1943. U-569 surfaced to charge batteries after shadowing Convoy ON-184 through the night. Captain Lieutenant Hans-Peter Hinsch checked the horizon. 600 miles from land, deep in the Black Pit, safe. Except USS Bogue's radar had detected his surfacing from 18 miles away. Lieutenant William Chamberlain was already positioning his Avenger for attack. The bridge lookout spotted the aircraft at 8 miles. Too late. The crash, dive alarm sounded throughout the boat. But Chamberlain's timing was perfect. His depth charge pattern caught U-569 at shallow depth. 4 Mark 17 depth charges, set for shallow detonation. The explosions ripped through the pressure hull. Seawater flooded multiple compartments. The submarine bucked violently, throwing men against machinery. Lights flickered and died. Emergency lighting revealed chlorine gas billowing from damaged batteries. Hinsch ordered the boat to surface. Better to surrender than die of poisoning in the depths. U-569 broke surface, her conning tower riddled with holes, diesel engines dead, batteries destroyed. White flags appeared on the periscope. The crew prepared to abandon ship as Canadian destroyer HMCS Street Laurent closed in. 25 of 44 crewmen survived. During interrogation, German submariners expressed shock at American attack precision. They knew exactly where we were. One survivor stated, "It was as if they could see through the ocean itself." The survivors didn't know about ultra-intelligence. British codebreakers at Bletchley Park had penetrated the German naval Enigma system. Every operational order from Dönitz to his submarines was being read by Allied intelligence within hours of transmission. The entire German naval grid system had been decoded, revealing patrol areas, Wolfpack assembly points, and supply rendezvous coordinates. Every U-boat at sea was potentially compromised, and escort carriers, guided to U-boat positions by intelligence and Huff Duff, were converting that information into systematic destruction. June 5, 1943. USS Bogue's aircraft located U-217 charging batteries on the surface 450 miles west of the Azores. Captain Lieutenant Kurt Reichenbach-Klinker had commanded the submarine through 3 patrols, sinking 3 ships totaling 10,651 tons. His experience meant nothing against the forces, now arrayed against him. Aircraft from Bogue attacked at dawn, catching U-217 in the vulnerable moments before diving. The first Avenger's depth charges damaged the submarine's diving mechanism. Unable to submerge, Reichenbach-Klinker made the fatal decision to fight on the surface. He ordered his gun crews to man the 88mm deck gun and 20mm anti-aircraft weapons, while damage control teams worked desperately to repair the diving planes. The surface engagement lasted 18 minutes. U-217's guns fired over 300 rounds. One Wildcat sustained minor damage from shell fragments, but the submarine was fighting a losing battle against aircraft specifically designed for anti-submarine warfare. The Americans could circle at will, attacking from multiple angles, while the U-boat's guns tracked slowly, limited by mechanical traverse. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. An Avenger from Bogue's squadron delivered the killing blow with depth charges that bracketed the submarine perfectly. The explosions destroyed U-217's pressure hull in multiple locations. The submarine sank with all 50 hands, including Reichenbach clinker. No survivors were recovered from the oil slick that marked her grave. The entire engagement, from first contact to final sinking, took 43 minutes. Bogue's aircraft returned to the carrier, rearmed, and resumed patrol. The hunt continued without pause. The pattern repeated across the Atlantic through the summer of 1943. Escort carriers appeared in convoy after convoy. USS Card, USS Core, USS Santee, and USS Croatan joined Bogue in operations. Each carrier maintained dawn-to-dusk air patrols. U-boats attempting to shadow convoys found themselves the hunted, forced to dive repeatedly, unable to maintain contact, their batteries depleting with each crash dive. Captain Lieutenant Klaus Bargston, commanding U-521, witnessed the destruction of supply submarine U-117 on August 7, 1943. Card's aircraft had located the milk cow refueling U-66 on the surface. The supply submarine was caught with fuel hoses still connected, making crash diving impossible. Lieutenant Charles Stapler's Avenger attacked immediately, dropping 4 depth charges that straddled U-117 precisely. The explosion of over 400 tons of diesel fuel created a pillar of fire visible from 30 miles away. U-66 managed to crash dive but was damaged by the blast. From periscope depth, Bargston watched the inferno and recorded in his war diary the words that captured what every U-boat commander was experiencing. The Americans appear everywhere simultaneously. Their aircraft arrive without warning. Their weapons are impossibly accurate. We are no longer hunters but the hunted. The destruction of milk cow submarines proved particularly catastrophic for German operations. Without refueling capability, Type 7C boats could no longer reach the American coast. Patrol areas contracted to the mid-Atlantic, where hunter-killer groups waited in growing numbers. U-488, U-489, and U-490 were all sunk within weeks of each other in the fall of 1943. Each loss reduced operational range further. Each sinking meant more U-boats, returning to port with mission unaccomplished, fuel exhausted, and morale shattered. By October 1943, the transformation was undeniable. The U-boat arm lost 23 submarines that month, including several veteran commanders who had survived since 1939. Each loss represented irreplaceable experience that training schools could not replicate. Young commanders with minimal patrol experience were taking boats to sea, facing escort carriers and destroyer escorts equipped with technologies their instructors had never imagined. USS Core's hunter-killer group refined the doctrine of continuous air coverage during this period. The carrier maintained aircraft over suspected U-boat zones for days at a time, exhausting submarine batteries through relentless pursuit. This technique proved devastatingly effective even against experienced commanders. October 13, 1943, Core's group caught U-378 on the surface at dawn. The submarine's commander, Oberleutnant zur See Erich Marx, had just celebrated his 26th birthday. His youth and inexperience showed in his response to the attack. Rather than crash diving immediately, he attempted to fight on the surface, exactly the wrong decision. 4 Wildcats strafed U-378, while 2 Avengers positioned for depth charge runs. The submarine's anti-aircraft gunners managed to damage 1 Wildcat before being swept from the conning tower by machine gun fire. Marx ordered the boat abandoned as depth charges shattered the pressure hull. Only 1 survivor was pulled from the water. The crew's average age had been 23. Most had never experienced combat before this patrol. They died in their first encounter with an escort carrier, victims of a war that had evolved beyond their training and their nation's industrial capacity to sustain. The brutality of these encounters shocked even experienced U-boat veterans. Korvettenkapitän Heinrich Bleikrott, one of Germany's top aces with 24 ships, sunk, barely survived an attack by USS Block Island's aircraft in October 1943. His submarine, U-109, limped back to port with extensive damage. Bleikrott never sailed again. He told fellow officers words that spread through the U-boat force like a virus. "The Atlantic has become a slaughterhouse. Every patrol is expected to be the last." November 1943 brought new American innovations that tilted the balance even further. The introduction of MAD, a magnetic anomaly detector, AR, allowed aircraft to detect submerged submarines at shallow depths. Sonobuoys dropped in patterns could track submarine movements for hours. The technological gap was becoming insurmountable. German submarines possessed courage and determination, but they lacked the sensors, weapons, and industrial support to counter what the Americans had deployed. Captain Lieutenant Ralph Reimar Wolfram, commanding U-405, experienced the futility firsthand. He developed techniques for evading aircraft using cloud cover and rain squalls to mask his submarine's position. His tactical skill had kept his crew alive through 7 successful war patrols. On October 31, 1943, U-405 was operating with Wolfpack Siegfried when USS Card's hunter-killer group arrived in the patrol area. The destroyer USS Bori gained radar contact at 2100 hours, range 6,500 yards. What followed would become legendary in naval history. U-405 crash-dived but was forced back to the surface by depth charges. Unable to dive again due to damage, Wolfram decided to fight on the surface with deck guns. In darkness and heavy seas, the two vessels collided. Bori's bow rode up onto U-405's forward deck. For several minutes, the ships were locked together. Crews fired machine guns, pistols, and threw hand grenades at point-blank range. American sailors hurled coffee mugs, shell casings, and in one case, a sheath knife at German gunners. The surreal combat continued until the vessels separated. Lieutenant Commander Charles Hutchins, Bori's captain, ordered all weapons to bear on the submarine. Over 4,000 rounds of ammunition were expended as U-405 attempted to escape. The submarine's conning tower was riddled with holes, her deck gun destroyed, and her hull punctured below the waterline. Wolfram ordered the boat abandoned as U-405 settled by the stern. Only 8 of the 49 crew members survived the freezing Atlantic. Wolfram was not among them. Bori herself was mortally damaged in the encounter and would be scuttled the next day. The engagement demonstrated that even the most experienced U-boat commanders could no longer survive against determined hunter-killer attacks, even when forced into surface gun battles. The technological revolution enabling escort carrier success extended beyond radar and homing torpedoes. Operations research scientists had developed optimal search patterns using probability theory. Acoustic analysis could distinguish individual submarine propeller signatures. Statistical models predicted U-boat behavior based on thousands of observations. High-frequency direction finding proved particularly devastating. German submarine doctrine required regular radio reports to coordinate Wolfpack attacks. Each transmission lasted only seconds, but that was sufficient for Allied stations to triangulate positions within a 2-mile radius. U-boat commanders faced an impossible choice: maintain radio silence and lose tactical coordination, or transmit and reveal their position to hunting escort carriers. The Germans believed their Enigma encryption system remained secure. They didn't know that captured codebooks from U-559 in October 1942 had allowed British cryptanalysts to break the 4-rotor M4 cipher. Every operational order from Dönitz to his submarines was being read by Allied intelligence within hours of transmission. Escort carriers received this intelligence through secure channels, allowing them to position near U-boat patrol lines before the submarines even knew convoys were approaching. December 1943 saw the destruction of several veteran U-boats that had survived since the war's early days. U-172, commanded by Captain Lieutenant Hermann Hoffmann, had sunk 26 ships, totaling 151,000 tons. Her crew was considered elite, having developed innovative tactics for penetrating escort screens. None of it mattered when USS Bogue's hunter-killer group intercepted U-172 in the mid-Atlantic on December 13th. The submarine had just transmitted a weather report, her position betrayed by direction-finding stations in Bermuda and the Azores. The first attack came from Lieutenant Junior Grade William Fowler's Avenger, dropping a FIDO homing torpedo that U-172's acoustic operator detected in time to evade. But evasion required high-speed maneuvering that drained batteries rapidly. Within 2 hours, 3 more aircraft had arrived to maintain contact. For the next 14 hours, U-172 played a desperate game of survival, surfacing briefly to ventilate the boat, then crash diving when radar detected approaching aircraft. By 0800 hours on December 14th, batteries exhausted and compressed air reserves depleted, Hoffman had no choice but to surface and remain surfaced. U-172's anti-aircraft guns engaged the circling aircraft while damage control teams attempted futile repairs. The surface battle lasted 43 minutes. Destroyer escorts USS George E. Badger, USS Clemson, USS DuPont, and USS Osmond Ingram converged on the submarine's position, firing over 400 rounds from their main batteries. U-172's hull was penetrated in 17 locations before she finally sank. 46 of her 57 crew members were lost. 13 survivors were pulled from the water and brought aboard the escorts. During interrogation, they revealed the depth of despair among U-boat crews. One survivor's statement captured the psychological collapse. "The ocean has become a trap. We cannot hide. We cannot run. We cannot fight effectively. Every patrol is expected to be our last. The carriers are everywhere. Every convoy has them. There is nowhere left to hunt." By early 1944, the transformation was complete. The U-boat force that had nearly starved Britain into submission was now being systematically destroyed. January saw 19 U-boats lost. February, 20 more. March, 23. The arithmetic of destruction was relentless and accelerating. Young, inexperienced commanders were being sent to sea with minimal training, taking submarines against escort carriers that had refined their tactics through hundreds of successful engagements. Oberleutnant zur See Wolfgang Hader, commanding U-434, and was 23 years old, with less than 6 months of submarine experience when Card's aircraft caught his boat on the surface in March 1944. He ordered his crew to fight rather than dive, a fatal decision born of inadequate training and desperation. The result was the loss of all hands within minutes. The U-boat force was consuming its youth in a battle it could no longer win. The quality gap between American and German forces widened with each engagement. American pilots accumulated hundreds of hours of anti-submarine patrol experience. Radar operators learned to distinguish submarine signatures from surface clutter at maximum range. Acoustic operators could identify individual U-boats by their distinctive propeller sounds, tracking specific boats across thousands of miles of ocean. German submarine crews, conversely, were becoming younger and less capable. The average age of U-boat commanders had dropped from 32 to 26. Veteran petty officers who formed the backbone of submarine operations were increasingly rare, killed in earlier patrols or transferred to training duties. Boats sailed with crews who had never experienced combat, led by officers who had graduated from abbreviated training programs that couldn't replicate the harsh reality of facing escort carriers. Admiral Dönitz's son Peter exemplified this tragic trend. The younger Dönitz served aboard U-954 as a watch officer. On May 19, 1943, the submarine was caught on the surface by British escorts and sunk with all hands. The loss of his son did not deter the admiral from sending other young men to similar fates. It underscored the personal cost of the failing U-boat campaign, but Dönitz continued operations, driven by Hitler's demands and his own refusal to accept defeat. Spring 1944 brought escort carrier innovations that made U-boat operations virtually suicidal. The introduction of centimetric radar on all hunter-killer aircraft eliminated the last sanctuary of darkness. Lee lights turned night into day, illuminating surfaced submarines from miles away. Even the most experienced commanders could no longer evade detection through any means available to them. May 6, 1944. USS Buckley demonstrated the intensity of hunter-killer operations in one of the war's most bizarre encounters. The destroyer Escort located U-66 on the surface west of the Cape Verde Islands. Oberleutnant zur See Gerhard Seehausen had commanded the submarine through 9 patrols, sinking 33 ships. His experience meant nothing against the forces arrayed against him. Unable to dive due to battery depletion, U-66 attempted to ram Buckley. The two vessels collided at 15 knots, their hulls grinding together in darkness. German and American sailors exchanged small arms fire at point-blank range. The surreal combat included sailors throwing coffee mugs, shell casings, and hand grenades between the vessels. Lieutenant Commander Brent Abel's crew fired 105 3-inch shells, 2,700 rounds of 20mm ammunition, and 418 rounds of 40mm shells in 16 minutes. U-66's hull was perforated in dozens of locations. The submarine sank with 24 of her 48 crew members. The hand-to-hand combat represented the death throes of an era when submarines could operate as surface raiders. The age of the lone wolf submarine, operating independently through stealth and cunning, had ended. The future belonged to integrated naval forces, employing sophisticated sensors and weapons in coordinated operations. The capture of U-505 on June 4, 1944, by Captain Daniel Gallery's hunter-killer group from USS Guadalcanal represented the ultimate demonstration of American dominance. The boarding party from destroyer Escort USS Pillsbury descended through U-505's conning tower, while the submarine was still underway, seawater flooding through damaged valves. They closed seacocks, stopped the flooding, and saved the submarine from sinking. The intelligence value was enormous. Code books, cipher machines, acoustic torpedoes, and technical manuals fell into American hands. But the symbolic value was greater. U-boats were no longer fearsome predators but prizes to be taken, their crews prisoners rather than warriors. The psychological impact on the remaining U-boat force was devastating. If submarines could be captured intact, boarded while still at sea, then nothing remained of German naval power's mystique. The invasion of France in June 1944 brought hunter-killer groups into the Bay of Biscay, hunting U-boats attempting to attack invasion shipping. The confined waters became a killing ground. 15 U-boats were destroyed in the first week of June alone. Survivors described attacks by dozens of aircraft simultaneously, making escape impossible. Every attempt to transit the bay faced continuous air coverage from escort carriers positioned along likely routes. Korvettenkapitän Herbert Werner, one of the few U-boat commanders to survive the war, described the experience of facing hunter-killer groups in words that captured the systematic nature of the destruction. We would detect aircraft on our radar, crash dive, and within minutes hear the splash of sonobuoys above us. Then the escorts would arrive, maintaining contact for days. We would surface gasping for air, only to find aircraft already waiting. It was systematic extermination, not warfare. By August 1944, Dönitz ordered the evacuation of French bases as Allied armies approached. U-boats attempting to reach Norwegian ports faced continuous attack from hunter-killer groups positioned along their route. Of 31 boats that attempted the passage, 11 were destroyed. The survivors arrived with extensive damage and exhausted crews who had spent days submerged, hunted relentlessly by escort carriers that maintained contact regardless of evasion attempts. The introduction of the schnorkel breathing tube allowed submarines to run diesels while submerged at periscope depth. But this innovation came too late and proved inadequate. Schnorkel-equipped boats were still vulnerable to radar detection and could only make 6 knots while using the device. It represented a defensive adaptation, not a return to offensive capability. U-boats equipped with schnorkels spent entire patrols submerged, seeing nothing, achieving nothing, merely trying to survive long enough to return home. September 1944 saw the deployment of the most advanced hunter-killer technologies yet. The Mark 24 Fido torpedo had been improved with greater range and sensitivity, New Hedgehog mortars could saturate an area with contact-fused projectiles. Radar could detect periscope-sized objects at 5 miles. The technological mismatch had become absolute. German submarines possessed none of the sensors, weapons, or tactical advantages that had made them effective in 1939. Korvettenkapitän Erich Topp, commanding U-293, witnessed the destruction of 3 other submarines in his Wolfpack during a single night in October 1944. His war diary recorded the psychological devastation. The enemy possesses capabilities we cannot counter. They strike without warning, with perfect accuracy. We are not fighting men anymore, but machines that never tire, never miss, never show mercy. The carriers have made us obsolete. The final months of 1944 saw U-boat losses reach unsustainable levels. November, 24 boats lost. December, 27 boats lost. New construction could not keep pace with destruction. Training facilities were bombed. Fuel supplies dwindled. The U-boat force was dying, and everyone knew it. Yet Dönitz continued to send boats to sea, driven by Hitler's demands and his own refusal to accept the magnitude of defeat. Young men who should have been in school were given command of submarines after hasty training. Entire crews sailed on their first and last patrol simultaneously. The hunter-killer groups had transformed the Atlantic from a battlefield into an execution ground. The story of U-396 exemplified this final phase. Her commander, Oberleutnant zur See Ernst August Gerke, and his entire crew averaged age 20. They sailed from Norway in November 1944 and were detected by USS Corps' hunter-killer group within 3 days. The pursuit lasted 18 hours. When U-396 finally surfaced, her batteries dead and air exhausted, she was immediately destroyed by waiting aircraft. There were no survivors. The crew died without ever seeing an enemy merchant ship, without firing a single torpedo in anger. They were killed by a system of warfare they had no training to counter and no equipment to resist. Their deaths represented not combat but systematic elimination. Winter 1944-45 brought the Schnorkel-equipped Type 21 submarines into service. These boats could sustain 16 knots submerged and possessed advanced sensors, but only 2 became operational before war's end. The hunter-killer groups had won the race against German technical innovation through sheer weight of numbers and systematic destruction of the existing U-boat force. No technological advancement could overcome the industrial and numerical superiority the Americans had established. The statistics told the complete story. In 1942, U-boats sank 1,160 Allied ships, totaling 6.2 million tons. In 1944, they sank 132 ships, totaling 773,000 tons. The hunter-killer groups centered on escort carriers had reduced German submarine effectiveness by 90%. The tonnage war's arithmetic had become impossible for Germany. At peak production, American shipyards launched over 140 Liberty ships per month, nearly 3 every 2 days, each carrying 10,000 tons of cargo. Even if U-boats somehow sank every merchant ship they encountered, American production would replace losses faster than submarines could sink them. And with escort carriers appearing in every convoy, U-boats weren't sinking anything. They were dying before reaching attack positions. By March 1945, the U-boat force existed largely on paper. Of 463 boats nominally available, fewer than 60 were operational. Most remained in port, lacking fuel, torpedoes, or trained crews. Those that sailed faced certain destruction from hunter-killer groups that had perfected their craft through 2 years of continuous operations. The battle was over. Germany had lost not just tactically, but industrially, technologically, and psychologically. April 1945 brought the final humiliation. U-546 attacked USS Frederick C. Davis, part of USS Bogue Screen, on April 24. The destroyer Escort sank with the loss of 126 men, but within hours, U-546 was hunted down and destroyed by the remaining escorts. It was the last U-boat killed by Bogue's hunter-killer group, bringing her total to 13 submarines destroyed, more than any other escort carrier in the Atlantic. Admiral Dönitz's final war diary entry regarding submarine operations contained a bitter admission that acknowledged the magnitude of defeat. The enemy's superiority at sea, particularly in the field of science and technology, has torn from our hands the most effective weapon we possessed. The submarine war has ended in defeat. We were not defeated by better sailors, but by better systems. The transformation had taken less than 2 years. In March 1943, U-boats had nearly severed the Atlantic lifeline, sinking ships faster than Allies could build them. By March 1945, the U-boat force was effectively extinct, its remnants cowering in ports or being methodically destroyed at sea. The hunter-killer groups, centered on escort carriers, had achieved this reversal through systematic application of superior technology, intelligence, and industrial capacity. They had transformed submarine hunting from an art requiring intuition and luck into a science demanding precision and persistence. Every aspect of anti-submarine warfare had been optimized through operational research and practical refinement. Search patterns calculated to maximize radar coverage, aircraft patrol schedules timed to catch surfaced submarines, attack protocols designed to maintain continuous pressure until batteries were exhausted. USS Bogue ended the war as the most successful hunter-killer group with 13 confirmed U-boat kills. USS Card claimed 11. USS Core destroyed 6. These escort carriers and their screens had sunk more submarines than traditional fleet units could have imagined possible. But their greatest achievement was not in numbers, but in methodology. They had demonstrated that modern warfare would belong to nations capable of integrating intelligence, technology, and industrial production into unified combat systems. Individual skill and courage, while still important, could not overcome systematic disadvantage. The romantic era of submarine warfare, where a skilled commander could overcome material odds through cunning and determination, had ended forever. The shock experienced by German U-boat captains was not merely tactical but existential. They had entered the war as elite warriors, the grey wolves who would strangle Britain's maritime lifeline. They ended it as hunted animals, trapped between an ocean they could no longer hide in and a homeland they could barely reach. Every surface moment invited death. Every radio transmission revealed position. Every convoy had carriers. Korvettenkapitän Peter Ziech, one of only a handful of U-boat aces to survive the war's middle period before committing suicide during a depth-charge attack in October 1943, and had written words that captured the transformation. We went from predators to prey in what seemed like overnight. The carriers appeared in every convoy. We had no answer. They possessed every advantage: H-not, radar we couldn't detect, weapons we couldn't evade, intelligence that revealed our every move, and most importantly, the ability to be everywhere at once. The human cost was staggering beyond comprehension. Of 40,000 German submariners who went to war, 30,000 never returned, a casualty rate of 75%. 784 of 1,162 commissioned U-boats were destroyed. The loss rate for boats on their first patrol exceeded 50% by war's end. Entire graduating classes from U-boat school were wiped out within months of completing training. American losses, by contrast, were minimal. The hunter-killer groups lost only one escort carrier in the Atlantic, SS Block Island, torpedoed in May 1944, SED, and fewer than 10 destroyer escorts throughout the entire campaign. The exchange ratio that had once favored U-boats by 10-1 had reversed to favor the Americans by 20-1. May 1945. Germany surrendered. The remaining U-boats received Dönitz's final order, FIT, surface, fly black flags, and proceed to Allied ports. Of the 49 boats that complied, many were commanded by officers, younger than 25. Their crews composed of teenagers who had never seen combat. They surrendered to hunter-killer groups that had been preparing to destroy them with the same methodical efficiency that had characterized the entire campaign. The last operational U-boat patrol ended on May 7, 1945, when U-320 was sunk by British escorts. Her commander, Oberleutnant zur See Helmut Emmerich, was 24 years old. He and his entire crew of 36 men represented the final casualties of a force that had once threatened to change the war's outcome. They died hunted, desperate, and obsolete, killed by a revolution in warfare they never had the training or equipment to counter. Post-war analysis revealed the elegant efficiency of hunter-killer operations. Search patterns had been optimized using probability theory. Weapon delivery was calculated to maximize kill probability while minimizing ammunition expenditure. Communication intercepts were correlated with operational patterns to predict U-boat behavior. Every element had been refined through rigorous analysis and practical application. The greatest shock for German U-boat captains was not the loss of tactical superiority, but the speed and completeness of its occurrence. In March 1943, wolf packs had nearly severed Atlantic supply lines. By November 1943, U-boats were being hunted to extinction, their bases under constant surveillance, their communications compromised, their every movement predicted and countered. This reversal occurred not through any single technological breakthrough, but through the systematic integration of multiple advantages. Radar that could detect submarines day or night, aircraft that could patrol for hours hundreds of miles from base, weapons that could find targets regardless of evasion attempts, intelligence that revealed enemy intentions before they were executed, and most critically, industrial capacity that could produce escort carriers faster than Germany could build submarines. The hunter-killer groups had written the first chapter of modern naval warfare, where victory was determined not by individual courage or skill, but by systematic superiority across multiple domains. They had transformed the Atlantic from a vast hiding place into a transparent battlefield, where every movement was observed, every transmission intercepted, and every mistake punished with destruction. Admiral Dönitz would spend 10 years in Spandau prison as a war criminal, contemplating the destruction of the force he had built and led. His post-war memoirs contained a telling passage that acknowledged the industrial and technological dimensions of defeat. I had believed that courage and determination could overcome material disadvantage. The American hunter-killer groups taught me that in modern war, technology and industrial capacity are decisive. We were not defeated by better sailors, but by better systems. The escort carriers represented not superior seamanship, but superior arithmetic. In the cold depths of the Atlantic Ocean, over 500 German submarines rest on the ocean floor, their steel hulls slowly dissolving into the abyss. They are monuments to the devastating effectiveness of American hunter-killer groups, who transformed submarine hunting from a desperate defensive measure into an offensive campaign of systematic destruction. The young men who commanded these doomed vessels had entered service, believing they were joining an elite force that would determine the war's outcome. They discovered instead that they were facing an enemy who had transformed warfare itself, replacing the art of combat with the science of destruction. Their shock at this transformation echoed through the ranks of the U-boat force, and ultimately through naval history itself. The German U-boat force had entered 1943 as masters of the Atlantic, their wolf packs savaging convoys with near impunity. They ended it as hunted fugitives, to WWII, their bases bombed, their supply lines severed, their experienced crews dead, and their remaining boats cowering in ports or fleeing from relentless pursuit by escort carriers that appeared in every convoy, making the ocean itself transparent. The American hunter-killer groups of 1943 to 45 had shocked German U-boat captains, not through superior seamanship or courage, ACE, qualities both sides possessed in abundance, but through the systematic application of overwhelming technological and industrial superiority that transformed the ocean from a sanctuary into a killing field, where precision, not valor, determined survival. The final statistics were irrefutable. The hunter-killer groups and their allied counterparts had sunk 784 German U-boats. They had killed 30,000 German submariners, while losing fewer than 5,000 of their own men. They had reduced the U-boat threat from near victory to complete defeat in less than 2 years. It was not merely a military victory, but a demonstration that the nature of warfare itself had fundamentally changed. The era of the lone wolf submarine, operating independently through stealth and cunning, had ended. The future belonged to integrated naval forces employing sophisticated sensors, weapons, and intelligence in coordinated operations. The hunter-killer groups had not just won the Battle of the Atlantic, they had revolutionized naval warfare and shocked their enemies with the completeness of their transformation from hunted to hunter. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.